Have you heard of Cyberpunk? Cyberpunk?
Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk. Yes, of course I've heard of Cyberpunk 2077. It is, after all, the most anticipated game of all time. And who can blame it? Spending 8 years in development, it is no surprise then that Cyberpunk is one of the most technically advanced games ever created, and certainly one of the most impressive. Yet despite all this, after just 44 minutes of playing, I decided to get a refund. DJ, turn that music up! Woo! Hey love, you need some help?
No, I'm just fine. Thanks.
If you say so. £50 well spent. Hype. Definition. Excitement fueled by the anticipation of an imminent event. When it comes to games, many are under the impression that the more hype a game has, the better. But I disagree. Hype is a double-edged sword. Of course, hype can be good, as the more people care about a game, the more it will sell. However, with such hype comes expectations, and the higher the expectations, the higher the chance of disappointment. As is true with anything in life, really. There are 3 different kinds of hype. Number 1, artificial hype. Artificial hype is caused purely by marketing, and not actually by anything substantial or concrete. Artificial hype is usually done by what I like to call prostitute franchises. A prostitute franchise is a game series that comes out with a new release, say, every year or every 2 years. The games are planned years in advance and are created not out of any sort of creative or artistic desire, as games should be, but purely because they are guaranteed to sell via milking their loyal fan base, usually under false promises. For example, my favourite game of all time, World of Warcraft, has recently become a prostitute franchise. Every 2 years, like clockwork, World of Warcraft gets a new expansion pack, and pretty much since the absolute disaster known as Warlords of Draenor, they have all been complete shit. The way it works, however, is actually quite genius. First, they release an expansion pack, and for the first month or so, people love it. I call this the honeymoon period. You know how when you put a ring on a lady's finger and you both go off for 2 weeks somewhere nice on holiday and have the time of your life? Then 6 months down the line you're at each other's throats arguing over the debt you're in from going there? Yeah, it's kinda like that. People eventually start to realise that the expansion has major flaws, and then begin to hate it. But then, like magic, the next expansion is announced. And guess what? This one will solve all the problems that the current one has. And like clockwork, people shift focus away from hating the current expansion and begin to become excited for the next one. Then that expansion comes out, and the cycle repeats. The cows will be cashed. Don't believe me? In 2018, an expansion called Battle for Azeroth was released. At launch, people were going crazy over it. Best expansion since Wrath, 10 out of 10, you name it. A few months later, and then all of a sudden, it's the worst shit ever created. But wait, the next expansion, Shadowlands, is coming out soon. Oh man, I can't wait. And then Shadowlands comes out, and what do you know? It's lit! Best expansion ever! 10 out of 10! And I guarantee that a few months from now, people will be saying how bad that is, and can't wait for the next one. But hey, Bobby's got to pay for his 5th yacht somehow, right? Again, the cows will be milked. For you FPS fans out there, another example of a prostitute franchise has to be Call of Duty. I mean seriously, how many years in a row has there been a Call of Duty come out? It's a good thing they stopped numbering them after the 4th, or we'd probably be on number 23 by now. The only reason artificial hype works is because boneheads keep falling for corporate marketing, and fall victim to becoming their cash cows. TLDR, don't believe in marketing. Number 2, expectant hype. The fact is, the greater the distance from a game's announcement to its release, the greater the expectations. If you've been working on a game for 8 months, people probably aren't expecting a blockbuster. But if you've been working on it for 80 years, you bet we do. The best example of this backfiring has to be Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem Forever started development all the way back in 1997. This here is a trailer from the game from around back then. Look at all those pixels. All 2 of them. With the game starting development in 1997, you're probably thinking that it came out, in 1999, 2000 at latest, right? Well, how about 2011? That's right, the game was in development for almost a decade and a half, and it was complete shit. Well, not really, I mean it wasn't a good game, but it wasn't as crap as people were making it out to be. But alas, with such a hefty development came hefty expectations. If this game didn't rocket us off to the moon and back, it's getting a trash rating, and it did. I suppose it's called Duke Nukem Forever because it took forever to come out. TLDR, just because a game's been in development for a long time doesn't mean it's going to be good. In fact, it probably means the opposite. And lastly, we have conspiratorial hype. This is when a game is expected, but isn't announced at all, even after a considerable amount of time, leading fans to wonder what the heck is going on. For example, the Half-Life series undoubtedly put one of gaming's biggest companies, Valve, on the map. Yet despite this, the last proper installment to the franchise was all the way back in 2007, with Half-Life 2 Episode 2. I mean, yeah, sure, we had Half-Life Alyx, but let's get real here, a VR game that borderline no one can play doesn't really count. We've had Half-Life 1, we've had Half-Life 2, so when the hell is Half-Life 3 coming out? The answer is never. As if it did, it would be shit. As spending 1.5 decades plus in development, even if that's not strictly the case, adds insurmountable expectations that could never possibly be reached. Valve knows this, and that's why we're never getting it. TLDR, if a game isn't even announced, it's probably not going to come out anytime soon, so you might as well just focus on something else. So what about Cyberpunk 2077? What category does this game fit into? Well, let's take a look. First things first, you get to create your character. Picking your backstory, putting in points, the usual RPG stuff. All good. But of course the best part of making your character is deciding how they look. I like to play myself in games, so I tried my best to make me, and this was the result. Does this look anything like me to you? It fucking better not. Look at that face. Now look at this disaster. I don't know what it is about Cyberpunk's character creation, but holy shit, it's extremely limited. Take hair colour for example. For some reason, brown hair just doesn't seem to exist in Night City. You can have green, red, numerous awful sickly shades of blonde, but the closest colour to brown is this ginger colour. Same with eyebrows. Why can I have green or pink eyebrows, but not brown? Instead I have to have grey or whatever the hell this colour is. I just don't get it. I look like some sort of retired model on Botox.
You alright? Fine. Just needed a breather.
In addition, terrain and buildings constantly pop in on the spot. Take a look at these red circles carefully and you'll see what I mean. And remember, I'm playing on quite a beefy PC too. I can't imagine what this would be like on last gen or even current gen consoles. Some things you just have to experience yourself to feel how bad they are. Examples being the horrendous mouse acceleration or the fact that everything looks smudged for some unknown reason. The ironic part is if I just picked this game up without knowing what it was, it's likely I would ignore these details. However, because I paid full price and know how much hype was behind the game, I feel ripped off as my expectations are high. The game clearly needs, no pun intended, more polish. Cyberpunk is certainly not a prostitute franchise. I mean, after all, there's only one game out and that took 8 years to make. However, after taking a look at this shit, it's safe to say that it was sold under expectations that were not met via their marketing. So in a way it did create artificial hype. Cyberpunk also blatantly created expectant hype due to its 8 years development cycle, so much so that it makes Duke Nukem Forever look like a joke in comparison. Such a large and ambitious project requires immense amounts of time to craft, and this is where CD Projekt Red, the creators of Cyberpunk 2077, made a huge miscalculation, as the game was announced all the way back in 2012. 2012. Do you know how long ago that was? I actually smiled back then. That's how long ago it was. Cyberpunk was originally meant to release in April of 2020, which was then pushed back to September. Fans were mostly supportive, stating that if the game needs more work, then so be it. So the game was pushed back again to November. which, though it did mildly anger some people, was ultimately accepted by most fans. Then, the game was delayed to December, which, though was ultimately just a month, pushed the fans into a frenzy. And in a way I can't blame them. It is unprecedented and extremely unprofessional from a AAA company for a game to have so many announced release dates and for them not to be met. And it isn't shocking that people started to feel as if they were being mocked. However, some people went way too far in expressing their disappointment. Some developers started getting death threats to, quote, "hurry up and finish the game, or else." No, seriously, I am not making this up. Now, I don't know what fucking moron thinks that sending death threats over the speed of a video game's development cycle is acceptable, Redditors, but I can't imagine that it was much motivation for them. Regardless, it is clear then from the overwhelming amount of delays that Cyberpunk was simply massive. Too massive. At least to finish in 2020. CD Projekt was stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the game clearly needed more time, but if they delayed it again, the fans would go berserk, even more so than last time, if that was possible. But if they were to release it, it would be a buggy disaster. Ultimately, as we all know, they picked the latter, and this was the result. I would also argue that it created a level of conspiratorial hype. Yes, the game was announced 8 years before its release, its presence was known, but with its troubled development and constant delays, people did start to wonder if the game was even real or not. Cyberpunk, unbelievably, has to be the best example of how not to handle hype, somehow managing to produce all of the different types by itself. Ultimately, I think Cyberpunk 2077 in a few months will resemble the fantastic game that we were all promised, and I can't wait to go back to it in the future when it's in such a state. However, at launch, it almost feels as if it's early access, or as I like to call it, unfinished. It pains me to think that the first and most memorable playthrough of this game for many will be an immersion-breaking disaster. Cyberpunk 2077 should be the ultimate lesson for both players and developers alike. Hype is a double-edged sword. It can be your greatest asset, but also your greatest liability.